think the line is where other people tell you it is or want it to be. Hopefully it's not the same with your romantic partner as with your boss, right? I mean, it might be that your romantic partner is your boss, but even then, I would argue, there is a line for the office or work, and there's a line, for the bedroom or home. Humans are complex creatures. I think our character, our personality, and our identity is pretty complex. It required a century of research to really understand even how you measure these things and how you make sense of people. And with that comes the fact that we as individuals are unique, yes, just like everybody else, but we also inhabit multiple selves, which means that we play different roles in life. So, there is the you who is the professional, the you who's the consultant, the you who's the boss, the you who's the employee, the you who's the entrepreneur, the you who's the son, the husband, etc., and so on and so on and so on. Work is not an invitation to display all of these dimensions of yourself at once, but rather an invitation to display those that are relevant. In contrast to just authenticity or workplace authenticity, actually, there's a lot more substance to the notion and even the measurement of authentic leadership. It encompasses a lot of attributes or qualities that are really important and valuable. They're really useful to differentiate between better and worse leaders.
Hello and welcome back to Leading with Integrity. And today we are talking about authenticity, both as a general concept and specifically to leadership and the field of authentic leadership. It's a slightly different take on what has become a buzzword, a well-known phrase in many industries today. And my guest is definitely an expert. He literally wrote the book on it. It's called Don't Be Yourself. So I am joined by Dr. Tomas, an organizational psychologist, author of many books, 15, I believe, but who's counting? And he's an expert in leadership, the workplace, authenticity as well. So we will be talking about his critique of the mainstream definition of authenticity, his arguments against that wide, broad definition, and how you should be using it correctly. We will be digging into, picking apart, going the deep dive, other cliches also available into this concept of authenticity, why it matters, why it goes wrong so easily, and how to do it better, how to have a more nuanced understanding of it, and how you apply it both as a leader and just as a person in life. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. It goes down a few avenues that I didn't expect. For example, didn't expect to be discussing Hitler and other dictators today. But there you go. That is the beauty of a authentic conversation. And he's going to hate me for saying that, but never mind. So without further ado, let's get Tomas on the show.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Tomas, Dr. Tomas, I should say. Welcome to Leading with Integrity. It's lovely to have you on the show. Looking forward to this conversation.
Likewise, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's potentially controversial, this topic, so we'll see how we get on with it. But before we get into that, I mean, please do introduce yourself to listeners. Tell us a bit about your career history, what you do today, why you do it, how you got there, really.
Yeah, so I'm an organizational psychologist by training. What that means is that I'm kind of a business shrink, if you like. Organizations are my patients or clients. That's based on the simple assumption that all organizations have problems. Most, if not all of these problems concern people, and understanding, the behavioral science, especially applying rigorous behavioral science to helping organizations solve or at least mitigate the people problems is what I do. I started my career as a professor. I'm still a professor, albeit very part-time, at UCL in London and Columbia in New York. And then I spent the last 20 years or so really either in consulting or corporate roles, helping mostly HR directors or CHROs or chief people officers, as they're called today, really leverage scientific methods, tools, and theories to improve their understanding and management of people. And the last book, which is a critique of the mainstream authenticity kind of a zeitgeist or cult, if you like, is an attempt to make people understand that work is not an invitation to just unleash your unedited or unfiltered self on others. You're not paid in your job or work to kind of be yourself, whatever that means, but that at some point, the right to be you ends and your obligation to others begins. So what I try to do in this book, which is my 15th book, is to bring some or inject some common sense into the popular kind of narrative or rhetoric around authenticity.
Okay. And explaining it in that context, it makes quite a lot of sense, I think, and we'll dig into that a bit more. So yeah, 15 books. Wow. Over what time period? Just out of curiosity.
Oh, yeah, I've never been asked that, actually. The first one came out in 2005, so exactly 20 years. I sometimes tell people my mother has all of them, but has read none of them. And I would say the first 12 or maybe 11, if you want to be generous, were kind of very academic. When you write an academic book, the expectation is that some people, maybe 5 or 10, will quote it without necessarily reading it. And the last 3 or 4 have been more what you call trade books, where you hope to kind of appeal to the general public. Some have managed to do that, others not. But, in essence, I try to kind of bridge the science practice gap around ideas that become big in the mainstream, especially around kind of management discussions or leadership discussions. I focus a lot on, how to make leaders better.
Great. Okay. Well, you're in the right place then.
There you go. It will be problematic if you now concluded that actually you wanted somebody else and you have the wrong guess because, well, I suppose out of British politeness, you would pretend that I was the one and we carry on for an hour. And then at the end, you say, well, this might not come out.
Yeah. I like to think I'd be more respectful of your time than that. But yeah, rest assured that's not the case. Yeah, it's an interesting, I mean, you were saying about how authenticity has a line. I think British politeness does as well, to be fair. But and the other thing, I loved your analogy as well about the psychiatrist for companies. I love that. Now I've got this idea of like big companies sitting on the sofa and stuff, but that's just my tiny little mind.
That would be nice. I mean, it could be something that ChatGPT can generate an image of.
Maybe so. Yeah. It'd have to be a big couch, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, let's dig into this authenticity question then, because I think you're right. It's become a bit of a buzzword, hasn't it, in leadership, certainly in marketing, and I think it gets kind of hijacked sometimes and turned into this just like be yourself all the time, share everything all the time, and it becomes this kind of constant. I mean, it becomes stressful, to be honest. And you're right. I think there is a line. So I guess the question is like, where is that line really? And what's wrong with wanting to be authentic in your view?
So let me start with where is that line, which is a really good question. I think the line is where other people tell you it is or want it to be. Hopefully it's not the same with your romantic partner as with your boss. Right? I mean, it might be that your romantic partner is your boss, but even then, I would argue there is a line for the office or work, and there's a line, for the bedroom or home. Humans are complex creatures. I think our character, our personality, and our identity is pretty complex. It required a century of research to really understand even how you measure these things and how you make sense of people. And with that comes the fact that we as individuals are unique, yes, just like everybody else, but we also inhabit multiple selves, which means that we play different roles in life. So, there is the you who is the professional, the you who's the consultant, the you who's the boss, the you who's the employee, the you who's the entrepreneur, the you who's the son, the husband, etc., and so on and so on and so on. The you who is the community kind of a member, whatever. You can add your hobbies, etc. So work is not an invitation to display all of these dimensions of yourself at once, but rather an invitation to display those that are relevant. And granted, even in your work, some people will want to access certain elements of you that are more private than others. I use a very simple example, but I think most people could relate to it. It's like most people have opinions about what's going on in the world today, whether it's, Israel and Gaza, Ukraine and Russia, climate change, Trump, Keir Starmer, etc. Not all of your colleagues are interested in your broadcasting your unsolicited views in a work setting. If you are a leader, the temptation to do so is huge because you think you're a reference for others. But that's a recipe to alienate people and to divide people. So I think in all circumstances, you need to be invited, or yourself needs to be invited to the party. In fact, in the book, I talk about the office Christmas party in the UK as a really interesting exception to the rule that, you should behave in a way that shows consideration. Now, of course, is being somewhat or largely sanitized by HR, which I think some people might lament, but others will welcome. But for a while, it was the only day out of 365 days in the year where you were allowed to just be you. And in fact, not just celebrated or at least tolerated for bringing your unfiltered self to the workplace, but even frowned upon if you didn't, if you behaved in a very sort of like repressed or contained environment or way, you'll be like, oh my God, so boring. This person can't even relax in the office. And then to your other question is like, although yes, authenticity is kind of worshipped and celebrated in every kind of area of life, scientifically speaking, the concept is meaningless. There is no such thing as the real you. I mean, lots of people have tried to kind of find a sensible or empirically valid way to make sense of it or operationalize it. Freud devoted most of his life to that. And he said, if you undergo 10 or 15 years of therapy, in the end, there's probably two possible outcomes. Your shrink will help you understand that you're neurotic and therefore there is no real you or real meaning, and we just make it up, and you have to live with that uncertainty. And, there's medication if you can, but otherwise, life goes on. Or you're psychotic and you truly believe that you are Napoleon or Elon Musk or God, and that's not the best case scenario. Of course, some people experiment with psychedelics. The Beatles famously checked into an ashram, into kind of like an ashram in India and meditated. Other people practice mindfulness. There are all these kind of methodologies, but there's still, scientifically speaking, no certainty that a certain range or, type of behaviors that you perform is the real you and others are not. We like to see it that way, but it's all kind of artificial, self-enhancing kind of rationalization that we make. In fact, research shows that when people do something that is good and valuable by others because they behave in prosocial ways, they interpret that as that was the real me. And when they screw up or they harm others, they rationalize it as saying, oh, look, that wasn't me. I was acting out of character. I was under pressure to do so, and so on. So I think authenticity is really meaningless as a kind of a concept, even if, it might guide our behavior or it might help us interpret our own behavior in a self-enhancing way.
Okay, this is interesting. So I've always been quite a big fan of the authentic leadership approach, but I do also understand what you're saying. I mean, how do you see things like individual identity and personalities and like trait theory and things like this in this context?
Yeah. And let me maybe start with the authentic leadership concept, because in contrast to just authenticity or workplace authenticity, actually, there's a lot more substance to the notion and even the measurement of authentic leadership. But if you unpack it, you would actually see that it encompasses a lot of attributes or qualities that are really important and valuable. And even if you can't objectively assess them on an attributional level, they're really useful to differentiate between better and worse leaders. But they actually depart quite a bit of the mainstream notion of authenticity. When people think about just being myself, authenticity in the mainstream, they think about the traps that I comment on or highlight in the book, like, don't worry about what people think of you, just be true to your values no matter what, bring your whole self to work, and always be honest with others and yourself. Certain aspects of those kind of traps or mantras are still present in the concept of authentic leadership. So, for example, consistency between what you say and what you do is there. Self-awareness, which is a prerequisite for being honest with yourself, is there. But actually, a lot of things are not present in the mainstream notion of authenticity. So authentic leadership is a lot about integrity. Integrity, you can't have integrity unless there is an empathetic moral orientation that focuses leaders or individuals on how other people feel and think. Authentic leadership is by definition not as egocentric or self-centered as the mainstream, and I would argue narcissistic, diluted view of authenticity. And then I think there are the bits that are, it's important to understand that even good things can be bad if taken to the extreme, or that it's important to understand the nuances that underpin even concepts like authentic leadership that are generally seen as positive. I would say, by most definitions of authenticity, Adolf Hitler was an authentic leader. It sounds controversial, right? Because we think authenticity is good. But look.
No, you're right. And I've said it before.
He was true to his values, no matter what. Sadly, the word destructive and toxic. He showed great consistency between his words and his actions. Sadly, if only, he had not acted according to his words, we would have been better off. By the way, as most populist leaders who aren't that harmful do when they need to get elected, but then they kind of become more pragmatic. And I would say, he didn't care very much about what people thought of him. He violated most, universal or close to universal parameters of morality and pro-social behavior. So it's interesting that you can use the same parameters and either arrive to like a Nelson Mandela, if you like, who opposed apartheid and emerged as one of the most moral leaders, and there aren't that many, of recent times. I mean, that unite, let's say the left and the right and so on, even though he was labeled or deemed a terrorist by the genocidal apartheid regime of his time, or you can get to an Adolf Hitler. So my point is like, even things like following your values are good if your values are good and are pro-social and take into the consideration the wellness of others. But if they're not, I'd rather you are not yourself. And by the way, we could apply it to milder cases, whether it's the Enron executives, Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, Epstein, and so on, or the people who caused the 2008 financial crisis. I mean, it's hard to see them or see that as being instigated because of a failure to just be themselves. I would argue, most of the human-induced pain and problems that the world experiences are the result of powerful, privileged leaders who take too much license to be themselves, to the point that they are entitled and they don't feel accountable, which is one of the ironies, because authenticity is usually hijacked or co-opted by diversity and inclusion programs, and we point the finger at diverse or outgroup individuals for not being themselves. If you have to tell people that it's okay to be themselves, it usually means they don't feel it safe. And in the meantime, the privileged elite, people who buy and own their own social media platform and who are the richest people in the world, they have the freedom to bully others, to behave without much consideration or empathy on how they impact others. And they're, they're kind of immune from any scrutiny, or at least outside the law.
I don't disagree with anything you've said there, I think. And you're right, of course. I mean, Hitler's the horrible classic example, isn't it, where authentic leadership kind of goes off the rails a little bit. But I also think that's why the approach evolved pretty quickly to add that ethical, moral,
really
empathy
important
component, didn't it?
Really important. And I with that, I have no issues. I guess even if we talk about charisma, right? People tend to find it a positive. We know it's a really, really strong enabler of leadership emergence, but in the end is neither inherently good or bad. If you're an ethical and competent leader, please be as charismatic as you can so that you can influence others, shape beliefs, and change society for the better. But if you're a psychopath or a crooked, unethical, or incompetent leader, my best hope is that you have zero charisma so that you are not effective, Again, I'm sure we agree on this one. It's not that controversial. If
Indeed. I mean, charisma, again, it's another one of these examples, isn't it, where, it's perceived by the majority as a good thing, even for leadership, but actually it can also go off the rails quite easily as well.
Exactly. I think most of the times when we think about concepts, well, first, of course, and I'm a huge fan of sort of like, if you like, the British approach to thinking about concepts or, ideas, because it tends to have nuance and be quite good at empirical or rational data-driven moderation, even compared to, let's say, I know, it might not be, completely bulletproof to what's going on in the wider world, but I think that's really important because we tend to want to think that things are either good or bad, and that's a problem. But of course, the truth is always in the middle. Rational moderation is correct, but it doesn't sell, And then at the same time, I think when we try to decide whether something is good or bad, we're often focused too much on the individual, And charisma is good for the individual. It helps you get faster. I mean, so does being politically skilled and Machiavellian and ruthless and aggressive, and maybe authentic because it feels good to just be you. But I think ideas and the consequences of behavior should be judged not just vis-a-vis the individual, but also the group. And if you do that, then, it's easy to understand that, well, is charisma good or bad? Well, it will be good for the group if it helps somebody improve their well-being, improve their status, but it will be really bad for them if it is somebody like, Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin. I mean, let's face it. I mean, Hitler is an easy example because everybody can relate, but pretty much every brutal dictator, even when they start in democratic ways and actually fulfilling a vision and embodying the values of the majority, but it usually doesn't end up well. Excess of power, tends to turn charisma into a destructive poison.
Yeah, and cynically, I guess it's the charisma is why they succeed at those early stages, isn't it? Is working within the existing systems.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I thought we were going to talk about, Keir Starmer as a kind of what happens when you don't seem to have that much charisma, which is the other side of the coin, right? It's like,
yeah, it's a tough one. Yeah, try and avoid getting into current politics as much as I can.
Good idea.
As
it's always better to talk about people who are dead and uncontroversially.
Exactly. Yeah. Historical figures. Yeah. No, it's interesting. So, I mean, if we try and relate this to like the average workplace, if such a thing exists, what you were saying earlier about the way that selfish take on authenticity, it can hijack an organization or a team or anything like that. For some reason, and this might be a tenuous connection, but it reminded me of those personality tests that you end up doing on company away days.
Oh yeah.
And there was a time, and I've told this story before, the listeners have heard it before, so I won't labor it too much, but I think it was Myers-Briggs we did. But basically they plotted out the circle of where everyone would sit.
Yeah.
You did the test, then you go and stand on the circle, and you end up with all these people clustered in one part of it, and one or two people by themselves. And anyway, and from then on, it was like the excuse to reduce behavior or decisions. So it was like, well, I sit there on the circle, which means I'm bad at doing this kind of detail focused work. Therefore, it's not my fault, and I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like it allows people to rationalize bad behavior at work effectively. And I feel like sometimes, exactly as you described, people hijack this idea of authenticity for the same reason. It's like, well, that's not really me, that bit of work, so I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
And it's,
You're right.
and I can see that getting out of hand.
Yeah, I love the analogy. Yeah, and I think it can work both ways, right? So on the one hand, I mean, when you make an internal attribution, I mean, of your behavior because it aligns with what a test, an assessment, or your character or identity think it is, you can use that to justify things, right? Well, I am disorganized, so what do you expect? I'm not going to pay attention to this, and you deal with it, and you deal with the boring details and proofread what I'm doing. And also, unfortunately, it can limit people's potential, because if you say, well, I'm not good at public speaking, so I'm not going to do this presentation. In a way, I talk about it in the chapter on leadership, because actually, this is stolen from my friend Herminia Ibarra, professor at London Business School, who is a pioneering kind of authority in rethinking authenticity, where she says, why limit yourself to your past and present self if you could actually sculpt or curate or craft your future self? And I love that, right? Because if you think about it, obviously the hope is that leaders can evolve, right? If a leader says, I'm a finished product, they're probably finished, because the world always requires them to evolve and expand, whether they're a prime minister, a president, a political figure, a corporate executive, etc. And what does evolution mean but change in your ways and your approach? And how could you change if you just copy paste what you've done in the past, if you play to your strengths, if you stay inside your comfort zone, So you can give, I know I work with personality assessments a lot, and I've designed them and used them. And I always highlighted this, I think, beautiful paradox that good personality assessments will actually predict what a person will do. It's statistical, it's not definitive, it's not rocket science, but if you use them at scale, you'll be you'll find better ways of being wrong, and you'll be wrong less frequently, And by the way, the Myers-Briggs doesn't predict anything, so it's good for ice breaking and kind of offsides, but there are better alternatives. But at the same time, good coaching or leadership development should invalidate the assessment. Because if I give you a good assessment and it tells me, you're an introvert, it doesn't mean I can't put you in a sales role and you will learn to schmooze, impress, connect with others, because we all have the ability to go against our nature, right? So I think even on that sense is like, I would say, don't be yourself. Try to be somebody better, or at least somebody different, and try to be, you might never achieve that because everything you do is part of you, but try to be a more expanded, diverse, and less predictable version of you. That's the spirit, I think, of coaching, development, and even like self-change.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the whole concept of a lifelong learner, that whole thing, that really appeals to me, especially for leaders. And you're right, I'm immediately suspicious of any leader who says, well, I know everything I need to know about leadership.
That's how I am.
Yeah, but you don't.
And also, this is me. The world should evolve around it. I mean, I sometimes tell this story. I was born and raised in Argentina. Now I spend almost exactly half of my time outside. Half of the time I spent outside, I spent in London. I became British. It's still, my second home. I would say, if not spiritual, adoptive home. And I had to make huge adjustments to adapt, which doesn't mean that I'm a fraud, I'm an imposter, or I lost, the essence of who I am. But progressively, and even though, especially I would say London is a very tolerant place and embraces people, or at least used to embrace people who come from outside, it was almost that you had an advantage or were assigned higher status if you were not from there. People were apologetic. I'm just from here. Oh, you're from outside. How interesting. Especially if it's a warm place where the sun shines, right? Immediately it's like, okay, that's a higher status place. But then as you try to kind of assimilate and embrace the culture, I had to become less excitable, less irritable, less explosive, more phlegmatic, if you like, to the point that, this is a true story. At my university, I had a colleague who had left and came back, a professor, and she hadn't seen me in 10 years. And she told me, what happened to you? You're so boring now. As in, I matured, right? Or maybe I became more controlled, more empathetic. I saw it as a compliment, right? But I think, this happens to people, whether they change where they live or whether they change where they work. If we assume that rigidity and imposing ourselves on others is a sign of strength or a virtue, we're just completely wrong. It's like we're lacking a modicum of social awareness, of self-awareness, to understand how life and work actually work.
No, I agree. And I mean, we talked about, or I mentioned identity and personality earlier, specifically because of this, because to me, those things can evolve and change over time, and they should. Like if you're maturing, you're learning, you're growing. So having this kind of fixed idea of who you are, and then as you say, like putting that together with the wrong idea of authenticity, and then trying to enforce all of that on others, I think that's I'm totally with you. Like I was kind of unsure at the beginning of the conversation where we were going to end up, but it makes perfect sense to me.
Well, look, I mean, I will admit that especially the first part of the title, "Don't Be Yourself," is a little bit clickbaity and controversial. It wasn't my choice. It was the publisher. They usually know what they're doing. If you had titled the book "A More Nuanced Take on Authenticity" or "Rethinking Authenticity," it will probably be more accurate and correct, but fewer people will pay attention to it. So there you go. There are trade-offs there as well.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. That is fair enough. Yeah, I don't know. I guess there is value in it, but as you said at the beginning, like there's a line where you don't go over that line. And to me, I think it's always been an idea, especially in the leadership context. I've always seen it as kind of the the defense against the inauthentic, if that makes sense, because there are so many leaders out there who are like, perhaps not cynically, but they play to the wrong things, even though that's nothing like what they believe or how they are out of the workplace. And I think that can be quite damaging too, not least for like trust and respect in the workplace.
Yeah. So two things on that. One is that, again, everything tends to be problematic when taken too far. In the book, of course, I highlight the downside of being excessively authentic or raw authenticity or extreme authenticity, which becomes narcissistic, entitled authenticity or antisocial authenticity. There are benefits in adjusting your behavior to others and paying attention to how people perceive you. But if you are a blatant, artificial, if you're a chameleon and you tell, even in your average workplace, to use your expression, you tell somebody one thing and then another something, you just tell people what they want to hear, and you're blatantly deceiving others and faking it all the time, you will be punished for it. You will be found out, But again, going back to the other extreme, there's a really interesting line of research now called the a-hole factor in authenticity and even authentic leaders. Like, sometimes people engage in such blatant, rude and obnoxious behavior to be seen as authentic. And actually, it might work. Politics, we have a lot of examples, right? It might work because people are so suspicious now and so distrusting of the political class, let's say. There's a reason why at some point, an excess of political skills make you a politician, and politician has a bad connotation, right? In an organization, if they say, what's David like? Yeah, he's successful and he's good, but he's a politician, meaning he's a bullshitter. I don't know what he stands for, right? So you will pay a price for that, and rightly so. And at the same time, that doesn't mean that people are truly interested in what you think or how you feel deep down. Trust, which is the most important currency in society and collaboration and in leadership, is gained not by being your true self or telling people what you truly mean, but by being a safe partner and somebody that basically is valuable to others. Let me give you a simple example. If I'm your colleague, not even your boss, but I'm your colleague and we work very closely, and you've just given a sales presentation and you screwed up, and you come to me and you say, Tomas, how did I do? You're not wanting me to tell you the truth. What you want from me is to tell you, oh, David, it was good, don't worry, because that's what makes our partnership safe and better, and that's what will make you trust me. Of course, you screwed up, so I don't have to tell you. And then at some point, you also maybe want me to find a soft and kind way to help you be better next time. But if that is an invitation for radical candor, and what I will say is like, yeah, you were awful, you're not going to trust me anymore, And same with friends, by the way. Even if you go to a true friend for advice, they will first evaluate what you want and then get to what you need, because that is a true friend, right? So again, if you broke up with your partner and you come to me and say, oh, what do you think? I'm not going to say, well, you're an idiot. Everything you've been doing for the last 10, 15 years led to this and it's your fault. No. I'm going to tell you it's your partner's fault. And then, after we go for a drink and, we can laugh about it and I can help you do better, right? So, trust is gained and trust is an attribution. It's not gained by being kind of unfiltered, unedited, and authentic in the kind of a blunt or transparent or kind of a conservative sense of the word, is gained by being somebody that has your best interests at heart. And leaders, again, if you're a leader and you have an employee and you disagree with that employee's point of view on what's happening in the world, do you really want to argue with them and antagonize them or alienate them? Or are you going to be able to at least pretend to take their point of view or their side and say, look, or at least say, let's not talk about it because it's complicated, but the world is already so tribal and polarized that we don't need to add more gasoline to the fire.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think that word unfiltered, I think, is the key for me to getting authenticity right. Yeah. Because it's not about like share everything of yourself all the time. Yeah. It's not about like every time you see someone, you tell them everything you've done and everything's happened in your life since the last time you saw them. Unless it's a friend outside of work and you've got that sort of relationship. In which case, fine.
But even with
in the
friend,
workplace,
right? Even with a friend, like
I mean, it depends on the friendship, doesn't it? Some people have that sort of relationship, and that's just how it works for them.
2 or 3 people,
Yeah. I mean, good or bad, if that's how it works in your friendship, fine. But in the workplace, though, it's I don't see authenticity as you must tell everyone everything about you, and it's all about you. I see it more as what you do choose to share for whatever reason has to be true, has to be real, has to be not something you've made up or an affectation.
Yeah. I think it's about finding that kind of delicate balance or navigating the tension between, on the one hand, being a good organizational citizen, displaying empathy, being considered, and understanding how your views and behaviors and your words impact others, but then also not being an empty suit, not being a phony, not being, like humor is an interesting kind of example, right? Because, and if you watch The Office, whether it's the English version or the American version, it's cringeworthy, right? To see David Brent or Michael Scott. We laugh because they're not our bosses, but that's a good example of how, people, when they have a little bit of power and they're in a position, they feel comfortable to crack jokes that might be funny for 2-3 people, but offensive to others. Now, at the same time, if you're so worried, cautious, and oppressed that you can't say anything, you're not going to be a good colleague either. People are not going to know what you stand for, etc. So I think it's about navigating that balance. The more you fit in, the closer you are to the normative group in an organization, the more freedom you have to do that. But that's also a warning sign, because there might be some blind spots and you might inadvertently, it's easy, right? I mean, think about even like lads going out for a drink after work. If there's one person in the group that isn't part of the same tribe, religion, gender, sexual orientation, culture, etc., the hope is that the others can make an effort to restrain themselves. And this happens all the time. This happens all the time. So I think awareness or sensitivity to other people doesn't mean you have to lie, you have to deceive, and you have to really kind of be a fraud. But I think, let's not forget that, for centuries, if not millennia, there was nothing wrong with smiling to your boss and bitching about them when you get home. That has worked for ages. And if you actually think that it's safe to criticize them or laugh at them or belittle them, well, you better be like Elon Musk and start your own company, because otherwise you're going to be just unemployable. And by the way, same with young people going to the first job interview. Just be yourself is probably the worst piece of advice we could give them. if you like, just be yourself, but on a really good day, and sanitize whatever that means with some social skills and consideration, that's okay.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. There's an interesting like social etiquette question there as well, and I think again like there's big cultural differences there too. So I mean, in the UK, like it's very rare to just tell someone to their face what you think of them.
Yeah, exactly.
In any context.
Exactly.
But that doesn't necessarily mean we're not being authentic either. So it's,
even
it's
after 20 years of friendship, it might not have happened, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like there'd have to be some pretty major event to make it happen usually.
But I think, that shows it's a very kind of subtlety is a very, very central kind of element of the UK's cultural DNA. And with it comes ambiguity, and you're actually creating how you communicate deliberately creates a lot of room for uncertainty and misinterpretation. I always say it took me about 5 or 6 years of living in the UK to understand what people meant when they were telling me that my ideas were interesting. There I was for 5 or 6 years thinking, wow, I am so interesting. It means like they're absurd, or like, please, keep them for yourself. This will never work. And really fascinating means wacky.
My favorite one is that, that was a brave thing to do.
Yes, that was a brave.
I love that one.
You're outrageous. You're really crazy, Yeah. But I think people still find a way to convey the message, and it's all about, in reality, that, precisely makes the point that because we care about what others think, even when we are trying to insult somebody, we find ways that seem euphemistically polite ways of telling them. And UK is not alone. American human resources professionals, when they're developing leaders, apparently leaders only have strengths or opportunities. They don't come with weaknesses or flaws. It's like, so what is this leader like? Well, they don't have many strengths, but they have a lot of opportunities. Oh, wow. Have you got someone with maybe just 1 or 2, not 15? Too many opportunities. It's like flaws, right? Weaknesses.
Yeah, I don't mind that one so much. I quite like putting it in that reframe of an opportunity to improve or to learn. But
again, the meaning is there, right? The meaning is there. Yeah. I am all for subtle nuance in communicating so that we minimize the risk of upsetting or hurting others. That is what a social environment should be like. Of course, if you overdo it, it leads to confusion, extreme kind of leisurely, conflict avoidant, passive aggressive interaction creates a lot of conflict in the long term. And if you work with somebody who tells you that was great, yeah, fine, but then the minute they're not with you, they're saying, "Oh my God, that was rubbish." There's a lot of unnecessary harm or problems that are caused with that. So directness will be good. At the same time, radical candor, radical transparency doesn't work for most people. It's too brutal. And even Ray Dalio, the Bridgewater CEO and founder, says in his TED Talk, we love to call it as it is and eliminate hierarchical sort of like power structures between people so that everybody should be able to criticize everybody and say in unfiltered ways what they mean. But, there are limits. If somebody has just returned from maternity or paternity leave and shows you a picture of the newborn baby and asks you, "What do you think of my baby? Isn't he cute?" You say yes. You think they aren't, right?
Yeah. The radical candor one is interesting to me as well, because I think, again, that was another one, like when that first came out, like authenticity, I think it was misinterpreted by a lot of people.
Yeah.
And a lot of people heard it probably without reading the book and then took it to mean brutal honesty.
Yeah.
And those are very different things.
Exactly.
And if you read the book, I think it's even like in the first page almost, it says, kindness is key. Like
exactly.
you can't just go and say whatever you feel without a filter and ruin everyone's lives and hurt all the feelings.
And I think trust is key, right? If we've been working together for 10 years and we know each other and we are friends, I will trust that even when you criticize me or insult me, you're doing it for a good reason, and it's, there is camaraderie, and it's not kind of a poorly or badly intended. But you have to get there. You have to get there. And that's why I go back to the job interview. The job interview isn't an invitation for you to show people who you truly are or what do you really think deep down, or to kind of unleash your whole or unfiltered self. Is an invitation to demonstrate social skills, which, by the way, include not sucking up so much that you will seem, fake, and not being so diplomatic that people say, okay, this guy has read How to Win Friends and Influence People too many times, and who do they think they are? Because that's insulting. But it's also not an invitation to tell people when you're asked, do you enjoy working with others? Well, it depends who they are. Quite frankly, most people annoy me, and I like to work with some people, not others. And have you ever done this before? Well, not really. But if you hire me, I'll try to learn it. Oh, wow. 10 out of 10 for honesty, but probably somebody else will get the job. If you hang yourself, you're not going to get the job.
Indeed. Yeah. I mean, like, talking about your political beliefs, probably no. Mentioning that you have some hobbies, most employers would see that. Okay.
Stuffing dead animals, or child pornography. Okay, that might be extreme, but
maybe don't.
Maybe. Yeah. I'm only saying that because you're British and it's a British podcast. I would not be saying.
I mean, that one will do you a lot worse than not getting the job, I think.
Yeah. But exactly. But, hopefully. But I mean, even like with the bring your whole self to work, right? Should I bring my whole self to work? Like, you mean you're inviting my political beliefs? Like, what if you're a fascist? Well, hopefully not. Yeah. What if you're a communist? Oh, well, maybe. What if you're a sexist? No. So if there is a list of exclusion, what you mean is I can bring my whole self if it aligns with the mainstream. Therefore, it's like, is this a cult, or you're just inviting those who are part of the old clique and, status quo to reinforce it? It's really interesting, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. I feel like the communist wouldn't be applying for the job in the first place, but sure.
Well, you never know. Might be a government job.
Well, yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah, I know what you mean. I think there is a question as well, though, around, I don't know about the whole, like, bring your whole self to work. I think from a leadership perspective, I think it's naive not to expect people's outside lives not to affect their work lives.
Yeah.
And I think, a lot of leaders get really quite cross about that sort of thing. It's like, well, you should leave your feelings at the door, that whole sort of mindset, which is just totally unrealistic and unfair to everyone.
Yep.
But I also think, like, if you try and hide, so let's say, take the sexist example, right? Like, if obviously you're not going to be like, yeah, I'm a sexist. It's all good. Yeah, I fit in here, right? You're going to try and hide that, aren't you? Because socially that's not acceptable, and nor should it be. But sooner or later, that's going to come out. Like, something you'll do, in the heat of the moment, or subconsciously, or just a pattern of behavior over time, people are going to realize.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, right? I think if you actually are that clear and it's wrong, and the environment, basically the culture is actually focused on sanctioning bad behavior as opposed to policing what people truly think, I think you probably might not come out. And I think there's a lot of that has worked for a while. Maybe with sexism is a bit strong, with racism is strong. But if you think like political beliefs, it becomes a lot kind of maybe more relatable, right? I mean, and I think, by US standards, the UK even now is not that polarized, But if you are in the US, chances are, if you have a big organization and you're somewhere in not, the extremes of the coast, that there's going to be people that are at all or both sides of the spectrum. And the only way you as a manager or as a leader can get people to collaborate when you have some people who love Trump and some people who hate Trump, is to put that aside and maybe get to a level of trust and empathy where they can make fun of each other for supporting or not supporting him. But to get there, you need to kind of first build the foundation of trust. Again, I think a lot of people, the situation in the Middle East is very polarizing. And, if you're a CEO or a leader and you think you have to tell people what you truly believe about that and either guide them to think in that way or sanction them because they think differently, you should be running a cult, not an organization, and in most of these instances, probably the only rational and mature kind of communication or angle is, listen, guys, it is very complicated. If you truly want to understand this issue, here are some resources, read whatever, but it's a heated topic that leads to a lot of tension. And if you don't understand both sides, just, it's safer to keep your thoughts private or debate them outside of the organization. By the way, we're not in the business of either solving this issue or telling people how to think on this issue. But if you do that, it's almost, kind of as unsatisfying or dissatisfactory as not saying anything, or as ChatGPT, who even if you ask, how was Adolf Hitler as a leader? It will tell you, well, some people think he was a good guy and others not. And it's like, what? Well, that is true. Actually, some people did think. So, for everything, there's probably more than one side and perspective. And I think you face a difficult kind of dilemma, either to try to make people aware of the nuances and different sides, but then, everybody will be annoyed. You end up like the BBC, right? People on the right would accuse you of being woke and people on the left will accuse you of being right-wing. Or you can tribalize and polarize more by emphatically representing some views but not others.
Yeah, it is a difficult one, isn't it? And I feel like, I guess to an extent it depends on what the issue is, doesn't it? I think, anything where it's just purely politics, I think you're better off just saying, look, we believe in respecting each other's opinions, and beyond that, that's it. That's all you need to say. But when it's something where like it's perceived as an objective right or wrong, whether or not it is, then it gets really difficult, doesn't it? And you will, like, even by saying nothing or by trying to walk the middle road, you will alienate half of the argument anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I guess the trouble is that almost anything becomes politicized today. It can be the celebration of a football player. It can be Gary Lineker. It can be vaccines. It can be climate. It can be, think of one thing that isn't politicized and hasn't been weaponized or hijacked by that, right?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I'd like to say something like, well, but then we just rely on the data. But again, even that, sometimes you can't trust it, can you?
You would think something like Brexit, you can rely on the data, but, it's still polarizing and it's still political. And I think that's actually mostly because people don't have the patience or the interest to engage in a data-driven debate. And look, really, despite the fact that sometimes I seem contrarian and provocative, my only hope is to initiate or have a conversation that looks at some of the data and looks at some of the evidence and highlights the nuances. If it leads people to asking questions, I'm really happy. I don't think necessarily they can be answered that easily, but I think asking some questions about things we take for granted is healthy.
No, absolutely. I think you've got to be curious, haven't you? You can't just, even if you think you understand an issue or a concept well enough, if someone else has a different view, then the first thing I would do is go and try and learn a bit more about it. Even if I think I already know quite a bit about it, I'm going to go and learn more if I can.
Exactly. And I think it's quite healthy to now and then have the ability or the willingness to question your own beliefs and question even your own, entertain the notion that maybe your values and your convictions are subjective and possibly also wrong. Changing your mind is part of the evolution of you as a human being.
Absolutely. And just like having the awareness of time and consciousness of things have changed, and because there might be something you haven't thought about for 5 years or something, and there's been a major change in that since you last looked at it. And
exactly,
but it's a very human thing as well, isn't it? To kind of, once you understand a thing, you stop, because you think, right, I've got that now, I don't need to think about it anymore.
Correct.
And that's now a fixed thing in my mind.
People become more intellectually conservative as they grow older in general, and actually, even when you think about political conservative, it has a connection with that, because to conserve is to preserve. Like, the brain slows down as you get older, and therefore you don't want to have to change or undo your beliefs and your convictions. So it's a strategy for basically reducing the massive amount of energy consumption that the brain needs, especially when you need to rethink things. Even things like, I'm going to be really, really superficial, but this is real, right? Even things like, I used to love Taylor Swift, but now she's spoken against Trump, so WTF, I can no longer listen to her. It's very painful and very taxing. And you think it's superficial, but as you know, this was a massive issue. And you might think, oh my God, how simplistic and stupid. But each and one of us has examples where this is true. Tony Blair, most of the people who admired him and adored him still don't forgive him for doing certain things that was not aligned with their values, right? And, you could argue, well, he adapted and that was his view and he had reasons for doing it. But so, it's very, very intellectually demanding to have to change our mind on things. And actually, it also makes us feel stupid, because there we were thinking for 10 years that this was good and now we change. It's easier when you say, I used to like chocolate ice cream and now I don't. But when it comes to like people or deep kind of political issues that kind of underpin our core beliefs, it's very taxing. And the older we are, the less likely we are, the less flexible we are, and the more rigid we are on these matters.
Yeah. Interesting you mentioned Tony Blair, like his generation of politicians, and George W. Bush as well. Like, at the time, if you told me and, give it 10, 20 years and you'll be wishing they were still there, would never have believed that, but it's true.
That's a different, I think, it might be grass is, always greener elsewhere. It might be general nostalgia, but it might also be, to finish on a really high note, that everything gets worse in every single area of life, It's like,
I don't want to believe that.
Even back to music, right? It's like, it's hard to think that in 100 years' time, you look back at Taylor Swift or Ed Sheeran and say, wow, that was so complex and intellectual. But that's what happens right now. Jazz music was the house music in the 1950s. And Mozart was sort of like house music of the 1850s or 70s, 80s or whatever, right? So it might be that there's a general deterioration of everything, or that we just, are nostalgic, or that we're just getting old.
Yeah, maybe, or we're running out of original ideas. Who knows?
Ideas as well, yes, yeah. But I'm with you. I'm with you on the kind of Blair and Bush comment.
Yeah, Bush in particular, from this side of the pond, anyway. I'm not sure what it was like living there, but yeah. So I'm going to be a bit cheeky and ask you one more question.
Yeah, sure.
Because it's the one that everyone has to answer, so you can't escape it.
Yeah.
So it's leadership heroes.
Leadership heroes.
So if you had to pick one person, it could be anyone you could think of. They could be alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious, but someone who, in your opinion, would perfectly embody leadership. Who would that person be for you, and why?
It's hard to find somebody better or closer to my idealized version of that than Nelson Mandela, I would say. And just the fact that the guy was in prison for 27 years, and he still had the stamina, the willpower, while being hugely physically debilitated, to keep fighting, to come out and not just get rid of a vicious, inhumane, racist regime, but do so in a peaceful way and, basically moving on as opposed to kind of inciting or igniting, is amazing. And I think, at least if I think of my lifetime, it's hard to think of people who can be so close to unanimously or universally seen as good, moral, pro-social people. Did he make mistakes? Yes, of course, everybody does. But even then, I think there are mitigating circumstances, and perfection is hard to attain. So I would put him. And I'm very comfortable. And it's a difficult question, but I think at least he is probably the least questionable choice that I can think of.
It is a good choice, and I agree with your reasoning as well. It's a slightly tongue-in-cheek question because perfect is unattainable, isn't it?
Yeah.
But,
who comes up most often? Who's winning the chart? Is it do you have like a Jeremy Clarkson Top Gear kind of a ranking?
I sort of do. Yeah, I haven't updated it in a while, but there is a spreadsheet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nelson Mandela is coming up a lot lately, actually. The top 3, I think, last time I did it was Jesus.
Okay.
Which makes sense. Captain Picard from Star Trek.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I can't remember the third is like a family member, like a parent or a sibling. That comes up. I see.
Who's the highest rank female that comes up?
Oh, that's a good question. Brene Brown has come up a few times.
Okay. Interesting.
And probably like mothers and sisters, that sort of thing.
Okay, good. You should publish that at some point. It will be interesting to see.
I did last year, which was the last time I did it. I'll update it.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right though. Not a lot of women get chosen.
Well, when asked more about kind of recent politicians or political leaders, I often have Angela Merkel there. Mostly because
Jacinda Ardern as well.
Yeah, exactly. But I think Merkel really embodies a lot of the kind of rational, data-driven, non-tribal, non-partisan approach. And I find it quite interesting how she started being really disliked by everybody on the left because she started on the right, and then towards the end it was the other way around, which again shows you can flex, which I think is good. Of course, then she ended up with some questions about deals with Russia and how that impacted geopolitics, etc. But probably also left at the right time and is enjoying herself somewhere in Mallorca or something like that.
Yeah, well, hopefully, well earned.
Knowing when to leave is also important, and doesn't happen very often, especially when you have power and influence and popularity, right?
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the reasons Jacinda Ardern comes up quite a lot, the Kiwi, because exactly what she did. She just said, "Look, I've got to stop, guys. There's not enough left in the tank."
Yeah,
that's ridiculously honest.
Yeah,
I can't think of the last time a politician did that.
Yeah. And I think far less likely in a male than a female politician.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, I can't think of a single male example of having done that.
Yeah.
Now that you mention it.
Too many examples of the opposite. Can't you go? Clearly.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
Indeed. Well, Tomas, it's been wonderful to meet you. I've loved this conversation. It definitely didn't go the way I was expecting it to go, in a good way. I will ask you one more thing. If anyone in the audience would like to learn more about you, perhaps get a copy of one of your many books, where can they go? What's the addresses and such?
Yeah, so the last one, which is Don't Be Yourself, Why Authenticity is Overrated and What to Do Instead. Easiest way is Amazon, which is ubiquitous. And if they want to find out about my previous books, my work, and more about me, easiest way is my website, which is drtomas.com. So that's DRTOMAS.com.
Lovely. Well, that's easy to remember, isn't it?
There you go.
Excellent. Well, thank you again so much for being with us. Great conversation, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Well, thank you again, Tomas. That was a really enjoyable conversation, actually, and we tested each other's assumptions there quite nicely, I hope. Listener, viewer, if you would like to learn more about Tomas, get a copy of that book, learn more about why just be yourself is maybe not the most helpful advice and why authenticity itself needs a rethink. If you've heard enough to pique your interest in this conversation, then I do encourage you, visit those links down there in the show notes, get on Tomas's website, get a copy of that book from Amazon or wherever else you get your books from. And if you're looking for help and support to develop as a leader, whether you see yourself as the bridge crew, the new recruit, or you're eyeing up those escape pods, then I invite you to come and join my crew of people first leaders. I'm sure you'd fit in, especially if you're a bit of a fan of science fiction. Step aboard the Starship Integrity today and be part of a supportive group of other leaders like you, where you can gain clarity on your leadership style, you can stop second guessing yourself, you can lead with more confidence. All of that within a safe, no judgment space where questions are encouraged, venting frustrations is understood, if not encouraged, but we'll certainly listen with an open mind. And you can always seek advice and share your experiences with other people, other leaders who get it. The link is also in the show notes and it's on the screen now. Visit www.leadingwithintegrity.co.uk and hit that green button on the homepage. And if you want more information and you can't find the answers to your questions on that website or in this podcast, always please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. You can drop me a DM, ask for a chat. Always happy to talk leadership with anyone, really. Again, you'll find that link in the show notes. And that's all I've got time for today. Thank you for listening or watching, and I hope you'll be back again next week. Until then, as always, be a leader, not a boss.